The amber light of late afternoon bled through the blinds of the studio apartment, painting stripes across the worn oak floor and the curve of a cello's neck. Clara's bow hovered over the strings, the final mournful note of the Dvorak concerto hanging in the air like dust. Silence rushed in to fill the space, a silence so familiar it had its own texture, a thin, taut membrane stretched over the life she shared with Leo. She lowered the bow, her shoulders slumping with a weariness that had little to do with the difficult passage she'd been practicing for weeks. From the kitchenette, the predictable, comforting sound of knife meeting chopping board. Onions, probably. Leo was making his famous chili, a Sunday ritual. The smell of cumin and garlic would soon permeate every corner of the 700 square foot world they'd built over 5 years. It was a good smell, a loving smell. It felt, in that moment, like a gentle, inescapable leash. "Sounded beautiful, Clary," Leo called out, his voice warm and slightly muffled. He never used her full name. Clara was for the outside world her students, the occasional gig with the city's semi-professional orchestra. Clary was his, a pet name that once felt like a caress, now felt like a soft, woolen blanket she wanted to shrug off, just to feel a different kind of air on her skin. "Thanks," she replied, her voice barely caring. She ran a finger along the cello's smooth flank, the wood cool and responsive under her touch. It was the most honest relationship she had. The problem wasn't Leo. Leo was solid, kind, a software architect with steady hands and a steadier heart. He remembered her mother's birthday. He laughed at her terrible jokes. He held her during her annual crisis over her stalled musical career. He was home, and that was the terrifying core of it. She felt homesick for a place she'd never been, a life she'd never lived. At 28, her future unfurled before her with the precision of one of Leo's flowcharts. Marriage, a slightly bigger apartment, maybe a child, decades of Sunday chilies. The vision should have been comforting. Instead, it induced a quiet, screaming panic. It had started subtly, a fissure no wider than a hair, a sigh a little too long after turning off her bedside lamp, a strange resentment towards his perfectly folded socks. Then, the dream's vivid, senseless tapestries of unfamiliar cities and unknown hands touching her face. She'd wake up breathless, guilty, and turn to watch Leo sleep, his face peaceful in the blue dark, a stranger she loved but did not know how to want anymore. The actual meeting was an accident, a cliché of modern life. A Wednesday evening, she was buying Rawson at Melody's, the old music shop downtown. He was at the counter, arguing amiably with Mr. Henderson about the merits of a rare, French-made violin bow. He had a voice like rough velvet, and hands that moved with an expressive grace as he talked. He was taller than Leo, with the lean build of a runner and eyes the color of a stormy sea. His name was Elias. He was a composer in town for a 6-month residency at the university. "You can't judge a bow by its price tag alone," Clara heard herself say, surprising them both. "It's about the balance, the tension. It has to feel like an extension of your own arm." Ilias turned, his gaze landing on her, really seeing her, not just the woman in the aisle holding a block of rosin. "A cellist," he stated, a smile playing on his lips. "You have the posture, and you're right, of course. It's a marriage, the tool and the artist." Mr. Henderson rolled his eyes, used to the whims of musicians. Clara felt a blush creep up her neck. They talked for 10 minutes about instruments, about the soul-destroying perfection of Bach and the messy humanity of Shostakovich. When he asked if she knew any good coffee places nearby, she gave him directions to the grind. She did not tell him she went there every Thursday after her students. He was there, the following Thursday and the next. Their conversations were a lifeline thrown into the stagnant pond of her existence. He spoke of music not as a technical pursuit, but as a visceral, breathing entity. He talked about his travels, the cacophony of Istanbul, the silent deserts of Nevada, the smoky jazz clubs of New Orleans. He listened to her with an intensity that made her feel dissected and revered all at once. He listened to her fears about being a mediocre cellist in a city that didn't care, about the quiet ache of her life with Leo, which she hinted at but never fully named. "We all have our concertos, Clara," he said one afternoon, his finger tracing the rim of his espresso cup. "Some are written for us, by tradition, by expectation. The trick is knowing when to scrap the sheet music and compose your own, even if it sounds wrong to everyone else at first." The words were dangerous, seductive. They validated the unnamed rebellion in her heart. With Elias, she wasn't Clary, the soon-to-be wife of reliable Leo. She was Clara, the artist, the woman with untapped depths and a hungry soul. The first touch was electric, and it shattered everything. It was after a private performance of a piece he'd written, just for her, in his temporary studio. A space cluttered with scores and odd instruments, smelling of old paper and ambition. The music was raw, beautiful, and it seemed to speak directly to the fissure inside her. When the last note faded, there were tears in her eyes. He reached out, his thumb catching a tear on her cheek. The contact was a bolt. She flinched but didn't pull away. His hand cupped her face, and the world narrowed to the storm in his eyes and the roaring in her ears. She leaned in. The kiss was not gentle. It was acclaiming, an answer to a question she'd been too afraid to ask. After that, there was no going back. The lies spun themselves, a silken, suffocating web. Late rehearsal, a student in crisis, working on a new piece with a composer for a competition. Leo trusting, kind Leo, would nod and tell her to drive safe. Every word was a needle prick in her conscience, but the addiction was too strong. The afternoons with Elias were a world apart. In his sun-drenched studio, time distorted. They talked less, touched more. His hands on her skin were not the familiar, comforting hands of Leo. They were exploratory, demanding, making her feel like a landscape being discovered. He composed melodies on the freckles of her back, whispered half-formed lyrics into her hair. It was art and desire, all twisted together, and it felt like being alive for the first time. The guilt was a ghost, present, but held at bay by the sheer intensity of the experience. But the ghost grew solid. It started to inhabit her home. Leo would touch her, and she'd stiffen, comparing his touch to Elias's. He'd tell a story about his day, and her mind would drift to a whispered conversation on Elias's disheveled couch. She began to notice new things about Leo, a slight bald spot he was self-conscious about, the way he chewed his food so carefully. These small, human flaws began to irritate her with an irrational ferocity. She was living a double exposure, and both images were blurring into a mess. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. Leo had made her tea, exactly how she liked it, honey, no milk. He placed it beside her as she stared blankly at a sheet of music. "You seem a million miles away, Clary," he said softly, resting a hand on her shoulder. She jerked away as if burned. "Don't!" The word was too sharp, a gunshot in the quiet room. He recoiled, hurt flashing in his kind brown eyes. "Whoa, sorry, you've been so tense lately. Is it the audition?" The audition, the city orchestra, a real salaried position, a dream she'd talked about for years. She'd completely forgotten about it, consumed by the secret world of Elias. The realization was a cold slap. She was jeopardizing everything: her relationship, her focus, her very self for a temporary, stolen fantasy. "Yeah," she lied, her voice thick. "The audition." That night, as Leo slept beside her, she made a decision. It had to end. This wasn't freedom. It was a different, more gilded cage. She was losing her integrity piece by piece. She loved Leo, not in the fever dream way she was obsessed with Elias, but with a deep, foundational love that was being poisoned. She would end it with Elias. She would come clean to Leo. They would heal or they would break, but it would be real. She arranged to meet Elias at his studio the next afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening and clean. She rehearsed her speech all the way there. "This is destroying me. I can't live like this. I have to choose my real life." He opened the door, a smile already on his face. He pulled her in, kissing her before she could speak. For a moment she melted, the familiar pull of his magnetism almost overpowering her resolve. But then she saw it. On his desk, next to a half-empty glass of wine, was a scarf. A brightly patterned silk scarf. It was not hers. She pulled back, her heart a cold stone. "Whose is that?" Elias followed her gaze, his expression flickering for just a second annoyance, then a practiced nonchalance. "Hmm? Oh, that. A friend. A violinist from the university. She was here last night. We were working on some duets. It was chilly." The lie was so smooth, so effortless. In that instant, the entire fantasy crumbled. She saw him not as a revolutionary artist, but as a cliché, a transient man with a transient studio, collecting experiences, perhaps even muses. She was just another composition, a temporary project. The grand, tragic romance was a farce. The ache she felt wasn't heartbreak. It was the humiliation of realizing she'd been a willing participant in her own degradation. "I can't do this anymore, Elias," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He sighed as if she were a child refusing to understand. "Clara, don't be dramatic. This is what we have. It's beautiful. Don't ruin it with bourgeois guilt." Bourgeois guilt. The phrase confirmed everything. Her real life, with its love and its chili and its folded socks, was bourgeois to him. A boring backdrop for his artistic adventures. "Goodbye, Elias," she said. She turned and walked out, leaving behind the scent of old paper and false promises. She didn't cry. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean by a terrible clarifying wind. Walking home, the weight of what she had to do next settled on her, heavier than any cello case. Confessing to Leo would be an act of violence. It would shatter the trust that was the foundation of their life. It might end them. The easy path would be to say nothing, to bury the betrayal deep and try to rebuild from the shadows. But the ghost was in the house now. It would always be there, poisoning every "I love you," every quiet moment. She had chosen dishonesty once. It had led her here. The only way out, however painful, was through a brutal honesty. Leo was on the couch, reading a programming manual. He looked up, smiling. "Hey you, how was the student?" She stood in the middle of the room, her coat still on, dripping onto the floor. She couldn't speak. The words were a physical blockage in her throat. His smile faded. "Clara, what's wrong? You're white as a sheet." She took a breath that felt like shards of glass in her lungs. "It wasn't a student." The words were a whisper. I met someone. A composer, Elias. I've been seeing him. For weeks." The silence that followed was the most profound sound she had ever heard. The book slid from his hands, thudding on the carpet. His face didn't crumple in anger immediately. It went blank, as if his system had encountered an error it couldn't process. He stared through her, at the wall behind. "Leo," she choked out, "I am so, so sorry. It was a terrible, selfish mistake. It's over. It ended today. But I had to tell you, I couldn't live with the lie." He finally blinked, focusing on her. The pain that flooded into his eyes was worse than any shout. "How long?" His voice was a rusted hinge. 7 weeks. He gave a short, bitter laugh. 7 weeks. And every day you looked me in the eye. You kissed me goodbye. You let me make you chilly." He stood up, pacing like a caged animal. "Who is he?" "It doesn't matter. He's nothing. A fantasy I was stupid enough to believe in." "It matters to me," he roared, his composure breaking. "Was he better? More exciting? Did he make you feel special?" "No," she wept, the tears coming now in a hot, shameful flood. "He made me feel lost. You make me feel found. I was just too blind and selfish to see it." He didn't comfort her. He just watched her cry, his own eyes dry and horrified. "Get out," he said quietly. "Leo, please, get out!" The force of it shook the windows. She stumbled to their bedroom, throwing clothes into a bag with trembling hands. She passed the living room, where he stood with his back to her, shoulders hunched as if against a blow. She paused at the door, looking at the man who was her home, now a stranger radiating agony because of her. "I love you," she whispered, the words utterly inadequate. He didn't turn around. Clara spent the next month in a friend's spare room, a purgatory of her own making. She called Leo every day. He never answered. She texted apologies that felt emptier with each repetition. She went to therapy, trying to understand the why, the restlessness, the self-sabotage. She practiced her cello for hours, the music now a refuge of pure, difficult truth. The audition came and went. She played with a raw, grieving passion that surprised her. She didn't get the principal chair, but she earned a spot in the section, a small victory that felt meaningless in the cavern of her loss. After 6 weeks, he finally texted back, "Come get the rest of your things. Saturday, 10 a.m." Her heart was a frantic bird as she approached the apartment. He opened the door. He looked older, thinner, but calm. The apartment was spotless, sterile. Many of her things were already in boxes by the door. "I've been packing," he said, his voice flat. They worked in silence for an hour, the only sounds the rustle of paper and the thud of books into cardboard. The life they'd built was being dismantled, box by box. Finally, as she was sealing a box of sheet music, he spoke. "I saw him, at that coffee shop you like. The Grind. He was with a redhead, laughing." Clara closed her eyes, a fresh wave of shame washing over her. "I'm sorry." "I don't want your apologies anymore, Clara," he said, not unkindly, just with a finality that was worse than anger. "I just need to understand one thing. Was it me? Did I not love you enough? Did I smother you?" She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the profound hurt she had caused. This was the consequence, not the dramatic fallout with Elias, but this quiet, meticulous unpacking of a shared dream. "You loved me perfectly, Leo," she said, her voice clear for the first time in months. "The fault was never in your love. It was in my inability to receive it, to be content with something good and real. I was looking for a symphony in a world that is mostly quiet, beautiful chamber music. I confused noise for passion. I broke us because I was broken inside." He absorbed this, nodding slowly. "I can't trust you," he said. "Maybe not ever again. That person you were with him. I don't know her, and I don't know if I can ever live with the ghost of her in our home." "I know," she whispered. "I'm not selling the apartment," he said, "but I need you to go. For good." It was the final merciful cut. There would be no grand reconciliation, no slow healing together. The betrayal was a chasm too wide. She had chosen, and this was the consequence. A year later, Clara stood backstage at the concert hall, her cello firm between her knees. The murmur of the audience was a distant sea. She was playing a modern piece tonight, one that was dissonant and challenging, about loss and reconstruction. She thought of Leo often, with a pain that had softened from a sharp stab to a deep, permanent ache, a part of her emotional landscape now. She heard through a mutual friend he was dating someone, a quiet librarian. She hoped fiercely that he was happy. Elias was a ghost from a bad dream, his power over her completely dissolved. The affair felt like a fever, a violent, disorienting illness that had burned away the person she used to be. In its ashes, a harder, sadder, but more authentic woman was slowly emerging. The conductor raised his baton. Clara took a deep breath, her bow poised above the strings. The music about to pour out would not be beautiful in a conventional way. It would be truthful. It would contain the memory of betrayal, the weight of guilt, the color of regret, and the fragile, stubborn hope for a new melody, composed one honest note at a time. She had lost the love that was her home, but in the devastating silent aftermath, she had finally begun to find herself. The curtain rose and she played.